Chapter 3. Old Man Cutter owned nearly 75 acres that swallowed everything directly across from Derek and all the way to the corner lot at the end of the street. Farms accounted for most of the properties for miles around, corn-yielding farms specifically. Old Man Cutter's farm was one of the largest properties in the area. He was also mighty proud of his robust peach trees. His peaches, a smaller than average grove, had taken on a reputation for shirt-soaking, face-wiping succulence. As delicious as they were, his peach crop generally didn't sell well at the market. This was thought to be mostly due to his open peach picking every Saturday night at sundown. For several seasons, local folks had been trying to convince him to ship a few boxes off to the state fair for the summer fruit competition. He just plain wasn't interested in the publicity or the extra work he'd be faced with in filling large orders if his peaches did well. He was more than content to watch from the front porch as his front and side yard were transformed into the weekend's social hub. Mr. Johansson, the market owner, added to the enjoyment by bringing bottles of soda ice-packed in tubs and selling them for $0.25 each. Every summer about mid-July, Old Man Cutter's daughter would send her 2 troublesome boys out to Grandad's farm for a couple weeks. The plan was always 2 weeks. However, only twice in 7 years did the visit ever last so long. And 4 years ago, their visit extended just 3 days, the shortest as yet. Nick and Alan were 1 short year apart in age. 4 years ago, they were 9 and 8, respectively. Each year, right after the 4th of July, Derek would inevitably get a sour stomach in anticipation of their arrival. To make things worse, Andy would make herself scarce, leaving Derek to deal with his across-the-street neighbors by himself for a great majority of the time. This particular summer 4 years back, the 2 scalawags brought leftover fireworks from the 4th with them. They'd deviously agreed to fire them off from the loft of Grandad's barn. From his own loft, Derek spotted the 2 of them sneaking a brown bag across the yard into their barn. Knowing full well what suspicious looked like, he headed over to see what they were up to. Old Man Cutter had a small storage room behind the back wall of his loft that the boys didn't know about. Sitting directly beneath the storage room was a padlocked walk-in tool closet with walls reaching up to the loft. The only access to the loft's storage room was via a ladder in the tool closet. Derek picked the lock on a regular basis and spent many evenings up in the old storage room with a lantern at his side. The room housed chests, furniture, and valuables that Old Man Cutter didn't care for others to know about. On different occasions, while rummaging around through some of the chests, Derek had found military artifacts from the first 2 world wars. Old, faded pictures of people, books, paintings, heirlooms, and many other fascinating trinkets and gadgets. When he first learned of the room a few years prior, he figured if he was going to spend some time up there, he might need a quick escape route in a pinch. So he'd stacked a few chests upon one another against the wall that divided the room from the rest of the loft. The storage room's wall stretched only to the rafters, so in case he ever needed the quick escape, jumping the wall was already set up as the appointed route. Every summer, Derek also used the storage room to spy on the boys routinely. He'd then jump the wall and sneak up on them in the midst of their mischief. In their estimation, he'd simply appear out of nowhere, which also happened to be exactly what he told them he did. He also told them a phantom lived in the barn and granted him special powers. They weren't sure they were willing to completely buy that story. However, the boys were so convinced of his capability to simply show up out of thin air that they found themselves looking over their shoulders for him everywhere and every time their mischief was on the rise. That day, when Derek saw the boys head into the barn with the paper bag, he straightaway headed for the storage room. Within moments, he was observing their every word and movement as they formulated a plan through their giggles and snickering whispers. Derek quickly scanned the muddled room and found a top hat, a long, dark cape, and a gentleman's cane. He stealthily crept over the wall with objects in hand and then snuck into the shadows where he donned the apparel. When one of the boys took out a match and prepared to light the first firecracker, Derek stepped out of the shadows with his chin tucked into his chest. He advanced himself a few more methodical steps, and then suddenly, everything went deathly quiet. He stopped, holding his stance for a moment, and then slowly looked up just enough to keep his face hidden beneath the brim of the hat. Images of popular horror/slasher film villains came to mind as Derek analyzed their dreaded expressions. He fought hard to keep from breaking into hysterics, believing if he gave in to even the semblance of a grin, he'd lose all composure. As Derek took one last step, Alan, the younger brother, lost it, backing away, giving into a fit of screams. He quickly gave up his brother. "Nick made me. He makes me do everything. Do him, mister, do him." Nick tried to say anything, when his hand went limp and the unlit firecracker fell to the floor. His face transformed from a blank stare into a large frown, followed by several promises that he wasn't really going to do anything. "Honest, mister, I wasn't gonna hurt your, barn, or I promise, Mr. Phantomum. I wasn't gonna light anything," he pleaded with big puppy dog eyes. With that, Derek snickered and the ruse was up. Nick's puppy dog eyes became narrow with suspicion, and then, as he realized it was Derek, they turned into large, angry saucers. He glared at Derek. "You're such a jerk. Man, I can't believe you." Alan wiped his eyes as giggles of relief slipped out of a half-hidden smile. "That was funny, Derek. You scared Nick half to," he said, pausing with a little laugh, and then abruptly held his tongue when Nick swung around with a harsh look. He stole a glance at Derek again, chuckled, and then wiped his eyes once more. "So what are you guys up to now?" Derek asked, snatching up the paper bag. "We have a few extra bottle rockets and firecrackers. Nothing major," Nick said, swiping it back. "A few? Where'd you learn to count? There's at least 3 or 4 dozen in there, and if your grandpa finds out, he's gonna..." "That's why he ain't gonna find out unless you're planning on ratting us out." "Well, maybe somebody ought to. Anyway, how are you gonna keep him from finding out? He's gonna hear them exploding." "See, Al, I told you. He's turned into such a spoilsport and a rat. I guess he ain't what everyone made him out to be," Nick said, peeking back over at Derek. "Wait a minute," Derek interjected. "What exactly have you heard? Because I ain't no rat, and I ain't never been a spoilsport either." Alan stood back and watched his older brother work his magic on Derek, and Derek was an older kid. Alan knew all too well how impressive Nick was when he wanted something his way. The two went back and forth until it was time to ante up. "Okay, fine. Prove it then. Go ahead. You light the first one," Nick said, handing over the matches. "I don't have to prove anything." "Afraid you're going to get caught?" "Get caught? I get away with 90% of the stuff I start because I know how not to get caught." Nick snapped back. "So what have you got to lose? Everyone's downtown at the market, so nobody's going to hear anything." Then he lowered his voice into a stern whisper. "Go ahead. I dare you." Derek rolled his eyes in exasperation, then ever so slightly moved his hand toward the matches, but thought better of it. In the same whispery voice, Nick added, "I double dog dare you." Alan gasped and immediately placed 2 hands over his mouth. Derek knew that in all his life, as far back as he could remember, he'd never passed on a double dog dare. But did they know that? Would it get out that he was yellow? Should he counter back with a triple? Well, it seemed clear to Derek that everyone knew the only time you countered with a triple was if you had no intention of walking out the double dare. 100 thoughts flashed through his mind in a matter of seconds. He placed a hand on his forehead, then dropped it down over his eyes and slightly shook his head. "Man, I can't believe I let him double dog me," he thought. "Fine," he said, snatching the matches from Nick's hand. "I'm only doing one, so hand it over, then back up." Nick pulled out the deluxe Roman candle finale and said, "Since you're only doing one." Derek wondered how he'd allowed himself to get into such a predicament. He closed his eyes for but a moment, then drew in one of those deep, "I'm such an idiot" breaths. "Just give it here," he said, gritting his teeth. He pulled out a single match and struck it against the side of the box. It instantly ignited. All 3 sets of eyes centered in on the flickering flame as each of the boys wore the allure of imminent danger on their faces. Derek placed the match against the fuse and waited. The fuse smoked but didn't take on the flame. He sighed with relief.
It's a dud,
Nick cried. Dang it, that was the best one. Derek quickly dropped it into the bag and then retrieved a much smaller one, a basic bottle rocket. He began fingering for another match when the bag suddenly lit up from the inside. The suddenness startled Derek, and he dropped the bag and then jumped away from it and yelled, "Whoa! Oh crap! What are you Oh no!" Alan screamed. "We're all gonna die." "Well, are you just going to stand there? Grab it," Derek said to Nick. "You grab it. You did it. It's your bag and your stuff." The wick was burning down. A dazzling light show of sparks erupted from the bag, sending some of the sparks 4 or 5 feet into the air. The tension mounted within Derek. He stepped toward the bag several times, trying to decide how to handle it, and with each one stepped back again. "Do something," Alan cried. Time seemed to stand still as each of the boys envisioned the next few moments. Terrifying illusions spanned from half the barn blowing up, then someone going to jail, all the way to half the county blowing up with someone getting spankings. Figuring that he only had a few seconds left, Nick turned and ran. He slammed straight into Andy, who just stepped off the ladder. "Oh, get off me, you little weasel," Andy commanded, pushing him away and then dusting herself. With her curiosity quickly swelling into irritation, she said, "Derek, what?" She spotted the sparks. In the world, she stepped toward him. As she did, he cast an unnerved look at her. "Derek, are those firecrackers?" His eyes darted back to the bag. He shuffled his feet in a nervous prance, arms set directly in front at the ready. It seemed absurd that all common sense would desert Derek on such an occasion. "Criminy, Derek, get rid of the bag!" she shrieked. "It's gonna blow us all up!" Alan yelled, backing up against a wall. "Derek!" Andy screamed, throwing her hands up. All at once, Derek leapt forward and kicked the bag from the loft. While it fell topside down, the Roman candle blasted into one of the sides. The bag spiraled out of control until the explosive flew out the open top, dashing straight away into a large steel feed trough where it exploded. The inside of the entire barn lit up and flashed like a strobe light. Smoke filled the air, along with the distinctive smell of fired flash powder and sulfur. Several embers streaked into a wall and then fell, landing into a small pile of hay. The hay caught fire almost instantly. "You idiot!" Nick shouted. "Me?" Derek asserted incredulously while running for the ladder. "You, who brought them up here to fire them off with disregard to all consequence, are calling someone an idiot? Well, you lit them." Andy issued a horrified gasp, folded her arms in absolute shock, and then glared down at Derek, who was now on the ground running toward the burning hay. Derek grabbed a leather poncho off an old rusty coat hook and then leapt onto the haystack, smothering the fire. He stood up and stared at a gaping black hole in the hay, lying directly beneath a large burnt char mark on the wall. He followed it up and, higher on the wall, saw the char marks left by the embers that started the fire. He slapped an exasperatingly open hand against the side of his head. Realizing he was coming down from the adrenaline rush, the weight of his anxiety suddenly took its toll, buckling his knees. He caught himself, but just barely. That little punk almost burned down this barn, he thought. Nick's remark from a moment ago finally processed. Derek answered, saying, "Well, if you hadn't. Double Dog dared me, but stopped upon hearing yet another gasp from Andy." He glanced up to the 3 on the loft and noticed Andy's eyes burned straight through him. She was right, and he knew it. He looked away, spotting the bag of firecrackers. He walked over to them, picked them up with a flare of righteous indignation, and proceeded to dunk the entire bag into a medium-sized water trough. Nick came unglued. "Those are mine! You can't do that!" "Oh, you're dead, buddy. You're gonna pay me for each one of those." "But Nick, you stole them. They didn't cost You. Anything, Alan said. I don't care. They were mine. He ruined every one of those, and he's gonna pay me, or I'm gonna...
You're gonna. What?
Andy snarled. Don't you know how much trouble you're in? Nick turned his back to her, and with a sarcastic wave of his hand said under his breath, he's the one in trouble. Am I in trouble? Alan asked. Andy glanced at him, and then released an exasperated grunt. She threw her arms into the air, fists clenched, and then said, Where do kids like you come from? She said to Derek, If I don't leave right now, I just might kill one of them. The next day, the two boys were sent back home. Derek was grounded for 2 months and had to do extra chores for Old Man Cutter until it was determined by his uncle that he'd learned a lesson.
Chapter 4.